Good evening, I'm Brett Baer. With just 13 days to go before America votes, emails obtained by Fox News show our nation's top leaders were aware terrorists were taking credit for attacking the U.S. mission in Libya the very day it happened. And while the White House is now saying there was still confusion, there are new questions about what could have been done in those early hours as the attack was still ongoing. We have Fox team coverage tonight. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin looks at the trail of information and the response or lack of it. But we begin with Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry on those emails, the explanations, and the election. Good evening, Ed.
Good evening, Brett. The White House wanted the focus today to be on the president's marathon get out the vote push, but these new emails are raising new questions about who knew what when over Benghazi.
We're going to pull an all-nighter.
6 battlegrounds in 48 hours, a schedule so jam-packed, it's the surest sign yet President Obama's campaign knows they've lost momentum and are trying to seize it back, with a final pitch that includes the claim al-Qaeda is on the run.
Al-Qaeda's on the path to defeat, and Osama bin Laden is dead. I kept that promise.
Yet new emails about the terror attack in Benghazi, first obtained by Fox News, reveal on the day of the assault, top White House officials knew that al-Qaeda-tied group Ansar al-Sharia had claimed responsibility, with one email sounding the alarm about the al-Qaeda-tied group by saying, quote, Embassy Tripoli reports the group claimed responsibility on Facebook and Twitter and has called for an attack on Embassy Tripoli. And just hours after the emails came in, the president suggested to CBS News the attack was not just random mob violence. In a clip the network did not immediately air.
You're right that this is not a situation that was exactly the same as what happened in Egypt. My suspicion is that there are folks involved in this who were looking to target Americans from the start.
Raising questions about why U.S. Ambassador to the UN Susan Rice claimed it was a spontaneous reaction to protests over an anti-Islam film, as well as this claim by White House spokesman Jay Carney on September 18th.
Our initial information, and that includes all information, we saw no evidence to back up claims by others that this was a pre-planned or premeditated attack. We saw evidence that it was sparked by the reaction to this video.
Today, Carney downplayed the emails, noting they include non-classified information culled from social media sites, telling reporters aboard Air Force One,
I and others made very clear that our preliminary assessments were preliminary, that an investigation was underway, and that as more facts became available, we would make the American people aware of them.
Carney added the al-Qaeda-affiliated group later claimed it was not involved in the attack, though the top Republican on the Senate Intelligence Committee tells Fox the only suspect now in custody in the terror attack is a member of that group. He's described as a suspected participant and not a commander of the assault.
We don't know very much about him because we have not been able to have access to him, and that's one of the problems with the policy of this administration.
All of this playing out as the president, in what he's calling a 48-hour marathon, is making trust the central issue of the final days.
There's no more serious issue on a presidential campaign than trust. Trust matters.
Now, today, 3 Republican senators, McCain, Graham, and Ayotte, fired off a letter to the president saying they're disturbed that the White House knew it might be terror within 2 hours of the attack. They're demanding the president finally come forward and directly address the American people about Benghazi with a speech or a news conference. Brett?
And Ed, just to be clear, the White House Press Secretary Jay Carney said, I think within a few hours, the organization itself, Ansar al-Sharia, claimed it had not been responsible. But again, Ali Ani al-Harazi is being held by Tunisian authorities. He, as we heard from Saxby Chambliss, is tied to Ansar al-Sharia.
That's right. And Senator Chambliss is saying this is the only person who is in custody, and in fact, he is tied to that al-Qaeda affiliated group. So the bottom line is that while there were conflicting reports about whether or not the group was claiming responsibility for a terror attack, someone connected to that group is now in custody related to this terror attack, Brett.
The only one. Ed, thank you. The attack on the consulate in Libya triggered a wide array of moves by the Pentagon, but help never arrived, and 4 Americans, as you heard, including the U.S. ambassador, were killed. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin looks at that part of the story.
Shortly after the attack began, an unarmed U.S. Predator drone was positioned over Benghazi. 6 hours and 20 minutes after the attack started, former SEALs Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty were killed at the CIA annex a mile from the consulate by a mortar shell at 4 a.m. local time. The president met his defense secretary and vice president in the Oval Office within an hour of the attack's onset. The Pentagon began moving military assets. 8 special operators were sent from Tripoli. A fast team of Marines from Rota, Spain were sent to guard the embassy but remained in the capital. A special operations force was moved from Central Europe to Sigonella Air Base in southern Italy, just 480 miles from Benghazi. F-16s and Apache helicopters remain parked and unused at Aviano Air Base in northern Italy. 2 Navy destroyers already in the Mediterranean were moved off the coast of Libya on the day of the attack, but were never used. Some former defense officials say it was too little, too late.
For the United States military to say that they were 480 miles away and they couldn't do anything and they couldn't move one aircraft in 8 hours, I'd say it's time to relieve a lot of people in the chain of command, but I just don't believe that.
Fighting at the consulate was over within 1 hour, according to the recently leaked State Department emails obtained by Fox News.
Officials in Washington reading those cables may have thought the attack was over. Now they know that it was a 2-pronged assault on 2 separate locations that lasted more than 6 hours. Brett.
News on the Libya scandal now. Fox News has obtained another email from the State Department indicating the portion of the U.S. consulate in Benghazi. It's actually the annex where some of the Americans fled during that terror attack, was under fire 6 hours after the initial alert. Jennifer Griffin talked about this in her piece. No help ever came there in this annex about a mile away. The subject line for this email reads, Benghazi shelter location also under attack, CBU. The body of the email reads, SBU DS Command reports the current shelter location for COM, that's Chief of Mission, personnel in Benghazi is under attack by mortar fire. There are reports of injuries to Chief of Mission COM staff. SBU means the document is sensitive but unclassified. DS refers to diplomatic security. Now, this email was sent to the same group of people who received the emails we told you about earlier. Military security, diplomatic portfolios immediately beneath the primary figures, goes right into the White House Situation Room. This email is very interesting. While the earlier ones indicate Ambassador Chris Stevens and others had retreated to the safe haven location inside the consulate, this email was sent more than 6 hours after the earlier messages, about 11:57 p.m. Eastern time. It's showing that mortar fire is hitting the safe location, the shelter, the annex, about a mile away. It suggests that Stevens and others are there. We now know that Stevens is not there, but others have gone there to the annex. But it's being hit by mortar fire. And as Catherine Herridge reported yesterday, mortars indicate terrorists because it is very sophisticated. Another very important development here. Keep it here on Special Report. More on this developing story with the panel. Fox News obtained emails on that day from Benghazi, going up the chain. First 4:05, the first word of attack coming up the chain, sent to about 400 different people, including into the White House Situation Room. There you see the U.S. diplomatic mission in Benghazi under attack. Approximately 20 armed men firing shots, explosions heard. Ambassador Stevens currently in Benghazi. 4 Chief of Mission embassy personnel in the compound safe haven. About 50 minutes later, the firing in Benghazi has stopped. A response team on site to locate the Chief of Mission embassy personnel. About an hour plus later, subject update 2, Ansar al-Sharia, al-Qaeda linked group, claims responsibility for Benghazi attack. SBU on Facebook and Twitter, and has called for an attack on Embassy Tripoli. Later that night, 11:57 p.m., subject update 3, Benghazi shelter location also under attack. This is the annex about a mile away. Current shelter location for COM, Chief of Mission, embassy personnel in Benghazi under attack by mortar fire. Are reports of injuries to Chief of Mission staff. This is what Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said about all of this today.
posting something on Facebook is not, in and of itself, evidence. And I think it just underscores how fluid the reporting was at the time and continued for some time to be. The Independent Accountability Review Board is already hard at work, looking at everything, not cherry-picking, one story here or one document there, but looking at everything.
White House Press Secretary Jay Carney also said, I think within a few hours, that organization, Ansar al-Sharia, had claimed it had not been responsible for the attack. The problem with that, the one man in custody in Tunisia, Ali Ani al-Harzi, is a member of Ansar al-Sharia. Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard, Mara Eliason, national political correspondent of National Public Radio, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Steve, importance of these emails and significance?
Well, I think they are significant, and contrary to what Secretary Clinton says, they are evidence. I mean, the intelligence community considers all of this kind of information when it makes its evaluations and its assessments as to what actually happened. These would be among the first things they would have considered. They're called open source intelligence. That means that they're not classified. They didn't come through, some kind of secret operations, but they are in fact evidence. Now, they may end up not being determinative. They might not tell you the whole story, but certainly it was the case that we knew early that there had been claims by a terrorist group to have been involved in this. Add to that the fact that the CIA station chief in Libya sent a cable within 24 hours back to Washington saying that he thought it was a terrorist attack. Add to that, the fact that we had an intercept between al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb, which is another al-Qaeda link very closely affiliated with al-Qaeda Central in Pakistan, and local jihadists, perhaps members of Ansar al-Sharia. You had plenty of evidence in the first 24 hours that this was a terrorist attack conducted by groups linked to al-Qaeda. And I suspect that's why President Obama, early, before they seemed to have gotten their story straight that they were going to blame this on the video, went on 60 Minutes and in this interview said, this was not like Egypt. This was a different attack.
Very interesting, Mara. This tape never aired on 60 Minutes. The first time it aired was the 19th, Friday before the foreign policy debate. I just saw it online today. Take a listen, an interview with Steve Croft that actually happened September 12th, right after the attack.
It's been described as a mob action, but there are reports that they were very heavily armed.
This is not a situation that was exactly the same as what happened in Egypt. My suspicion is that there are folks involved in this who were looking to target Americans from the start.
Okay, this is a few days later, 8 days later, and then the 20th, the 24th, the 25th.
What we do know is that the natural protests that arose because of the outrage over the video were used as an excuse by extremists to see if they can also directly harm U.S. interests. Well, we don't know yet.
I heard Hillary Clinton say that it was an act of terrorism. Is it? What do you say?
Well, we're still doing an investigation. There is no speech that justifies mindless violence.
So that sounds completely different than September 12th.
Well, I think that the administration stories not only shifted, but the tone of them. Over time, they put more emphasis on the video, whereas it seems like the president's first suspicions, based on what they were hearing from the scene, was that extremists were involved. Even when Susan Rice was on Face the Nation and she was asked about al-Qaeda, she said, well, we'll have to find that out. It's clear there were extremist elements that joined in. Whether they were al-Qaeda, whether they were Libyan-based extremists or al-Qaeda itself is one of the things we're going to have to determine. So there always was this possibility, but the emphasis was on spontaneity, the videotape. My impression is that if this was a cover-up, which is what people are charging, it was the worst cover-up, the shortest lived, and the most poorly organized that I've ever seen. But they clearly didn't have enough information, or they didn't wait to talk about it in the proper way.
We now know that on September 14th, this is 3 days after the attack, the administration knows that there was no protest. They know it internally. And there's some reporting from Eli Lake that the FBI actually interviewed the security officers when they were in Ramstein Air Base who were there at the consulate and said there was never a protest. Catherine Herridge had some early reporting on it. They know that there's no protest. They have these emails now that there's at least one group that's claiming responsibility, and we've shown those reports, Charles, from August that tie Ansar al-Sharia to al-Qaeda directly. And yet, Jay Carney says this on the 18th. Let's play this.
Our initial information, and that includes all information, we saw no evidence to back up claims by others that this was a pre-planned or premeditated attack. That we saw evidence that it was sparked by the reaction to this video. And that is what we know thus far, based on the evidence, concrete evidence, not supposition, concrete evidence that we have thus far.
There are 5 emails here, let alone the emails that we heard from Ambassador Stevens, even on the day he died, about the concern about al-Qaeda in Benghazi. Concrete evidence.
When you say there is no evidence, you're telling a falsehood. If you had just said the weight of the evidence, or we think X, it's the video, that's one thing. But when you say there's no evidence that it was a premeditated attack, and you have all the evidence that we see in the emails, the claim, the fact that the station chief is saying it's a premeditated attack, you've got all this evidence, that's simply not so. And then you get the president saying on the Daily Show last week that we were releasing information continually as it came out. That's also not true. What we're seeing here, these emails were not released by the State Department. It came from other sources. I mean, their story is piling one untruth on top of another. And the fact that it was an incompetent cover-up is not an argument against it being a cover-up. A lot of cover-ups and crimes and other stuff in life are incompetent. There's no evidence. That's not evidence that it wasn't. And the theory I have is they might have thought at the beginning this is going to be a terror attack, we're going to have to go out with it. But remember what happened between the attack and the Susan Rice appearance. 3 days of unrelenting media coverage of Romney, the Romney statement, the attacks on Romney, the gaffe he made and all that. The media were uninterested in the story. They might have made a calculation. The media is interested in the Romney stuff. They're not going to be interested in this all detail. We ride it out until Election Day. What the Secretary of State said in the statement that we saw is, you know, let's not rush to any judgment because we're going to get the report of her committee. Do you know when her committee is going to report? In the middle of next month. That means after Election Day. All they wanted to do from the beginning is to string it out until Election Day. And why not run with a story that it's all about an American nut who released a video and not about the administration for admitting that al-Qaeda is not on its heels, but al-Qaeda is active.
This did not come up significantly, and Governor Romney didn't jump on it in the last debate this week. Steve, how does this affect the presidential race, and does it move the needle?
Well, I'm not sure it does affect the race very much. I mean, when Governor Romney doesn't talk about it, and the Romney campaign isn't focused on it, it gives excuses, frankly, to news organizations who ought to be covering this. I mean, this is a huge story no matter what.
And it will be, no matter who wins the election.
No question.
And if President Obama wins the election, it will be a huge
an
story
ongoing scandal. We'll get these reports. There will be hearings in Congress. You can bet on all of that. And look, you have, whatever anybody believes about the ultimate truth of this, you have a series now, almost 6 weeks of directly contradictory statements, one after another, made by the administration. Now, it may be just incompetence, but that's a lot of incompetence for that kind of a story.
You know, first of all, in all of those cases, you'd think they would have learned and merely say, hey, we're investigating. We don't know. This is chaotic and confusing. That would have been better. Just a placeholder till you get your facts straight. Better than having to backtrack. But, well, you know, something about, I just want to talk about the politics of this.
The fluid reporting that Secretary Clinton talks about at the time, I mean, you would think concrete evidence is not exactly what you want your
That's
White
right.
House
That's what I'm saying. Why not just say we're investigating,
but
we simply don't know, instead of tying yourself down to a story that you're going to have to later walk back from. Or be criticized for. But I want to say something about the politics of this. You know, Mitt Romney has one of the biggest megaphones that anybody, any human being can have. He is the Republican nominee for president. And he had a chance, you know, Charles says too much focus was put on him. He had a chance to say that the administration left the embassy unprotected, they bungled the Arab Spring, but he focused on an attack that he said the White House sympathized with the attackers. And so, you know, he had a choice there, and he made a choice. He had a choice also in Florida. He didn't bring this up. This would have been a huge, every one of us was prepared to write a lot about Libya before the debate in Florida, and he chose not to bring it up.
This is journalistic malpractice, and to blame it on the candidate who's got other ideas, other strategic reasons, and say, well, because he didn't ask for looking into this, we're not going to do it, doesn't excuse.
I'm talking about in the context of our stories on the campaign.
It does not, but in the context of the story of the scandal, the media ought to be on it, Romney or not, so it's not an excuse.
Stick around to the online show, and you have more to say. Strong letter to follow.
Absolutely.
We have an online show after this show. Much more on this and the Electoral College as well. That's it for the panel, but stay with us to see how the candidates try to really differentiate themselves at the debate this week.